Hello Bio 2, we're going to finish up with our last section in chapter 28, and it's going to look at another invertebrate group known as the Echinoderms. And so before we get started with what the heck Echinoderms are, we have to get what are their distinguishing features. So what is this group going to look like? What makes them up? What makes them what they are? So Echinoderms, they're characterized by having spiny skin, and they have an internal skeleton, so no more exoskeleton. And they have what's called a water vascular system, so that's going to be a unique characteristic found in this group, so that's going to be something you're going to need to know about them. And they have suction cup-like structures that are called tube feet. And most adult echinoderms will exhibit what is known as 5-part radial symmetry, meaning you can draw a line in any 5 directions and it'll still divide them in half. And if you can tell by now with maybe things like suction cups with tube feet, 5-part radial symmetry sounds a lot like a star. It's the shape of a star, so this group is going to have the most famous example of what we call the starfish. And so then, what is an echinoderm overall? So again, just continuing on, is that echinoderms are stretched over an endoskeleton, so again, skeleton that's on the inside. It's formed by hardened plates of calcium carbonate, and adult echinoderms, they typically have no anterior or posterior end, so therefore they lack a cephalization, so they're really not going to have a brain, they have really no front, and they really have no back. And the side of the mouth, and the side that the mouth is located in, is called the oral surface, and then the opposite side is called the aboral surface. So basically there's no anterior, there's no posterior, there's no dorsal, there's no ventral within this group. There's just the oral surface and then the aboral surface. And echinoderms, if we kind of going to have to take a look back to the first chapter of this semester, they are deuterostomes, meaning they're animals in which the blastopore developed into an anus. Again, that's what they share in common actually with vertebrate animals, so they're the closest relatives to our backboned animals. And some examples of this group include sea stars, sea urchins, and sand dollars are all going to be echinoderms. Again, echinoderm, one of the big meanings of this word is that it's spiny skinned, so that's going to be kind of a big characteristic found throughout this group. And so I mentioned earlier the water vascular system, how that's an important characteristic just found in this group. So we're going to look at what functions it actually carries out to help them survive. So echinoderms, they have a system of internal tubes that are called the water vascular system, and this system carries out many essential body functions, including respiration, circulation, and movement. So they depend heavily on this water vascular system for their survival. And then here kind of looks like this is what it kind of looks like on the inside here in the blue. That's kind of the big water vascular system kind of highlighted there, with the red part being more of their reproductive organs. So the water vascular system opens to the outside, so it obviously has to be connected to the outside if it's going to be kind of a big contributing factor, through a sieve-like structure. Sieve is just kind of like a tube structure, so you could say like a tube-like structure called the madreporite. So that's how you say that, madreporite. So that's going to be a word you're going to need to know. It's the opening into the water vascular system of the echinoderms. And then they have a tube foot, which that word was mentioned earlier, is attached to each radial canal. And so if you remember, we said they had 5-part radial symmetry, so if you look, 5 little extensions. So each extension off of that main part, so each kind of going to the point of the star, is known as a radial canal. And so there's a tube foot that's attached to each radial canal. And these tube feet act together to create enormous force, which allow echinoderms to walk and to pull open shelled prey. So they're going to feed mainly on one of our last groups, the bivalves of the mollusks, and so that's what they're mainly going to feed on, and they use these tube feet to kind of help them walk and to again help them rip open those shelled prey. And so this is going to be kind of a nice transition into what we just mentioned about how they feed. So sea urchins, they actually have a jaw-like structure, and they use to scrape algae from rocks. And then there's another example of this group that are called sea lilies, and they use tube feet along their arms to capture floating plankton. And then there's sea cucumbers that move across the ocean floor, and they take in sand and detritus, which is just dead and decaying material and decomposing material. And then kind of one of the coolest examples of feeding in this group is actually our most famous example, the sea star, or the starfish, and they usually feed on clams and mussels. And what they do is they literally basically vomit up, well, not vomit, they take their stomach, and their stomach comes through the opening of their mouth, and then it surrounds whatever they're going to eat. They digest the food outside of the body, still within the shells, and then they pull their stomach back into their mouth, and that is how they feed. So it would be basically like to the equivalent of you sitting at the lunch table. You have your food all nice and lined up on your tray. Your stomach comes out of your mouth, wraps around your tray, wraps around all your food, and then you just digest it there and then pull it back inside your body. That's pretty much the equivalent of what a starfish or sea star does. And again, I just mentioned this, but they start digesting the mollusk in its own shell outside of their body, outside of, again, the sea star's body, and then they pull their stomach and the partially digested prey back into its mouth. So that's a pretty cool example of feeding within this group. And for respiration and circulation, most echinoderms, they have the thin-walled tissue of their tube feet provides their main service for respiration, so they can take in their oxygen, give off their CO2. And in some species, there's small outgrowth that are called skin gills that also function in gas exchange. So there's some that have a little extra help along those tube feet to help them with their respiration. And then circulation of needed materials and waste takes place through their water vascular system as well. So the water vascular system helps remove cellular waste and then pass along nutrients. And so for our last part for this video is excretion. And in most echinoderms, digestive wastes are released as feces through the anus, so they actually do have a mouth and an anus. And then the nitrogen-containing cellular wastes are excreted primarily in the form of ammonia, and then, which again is typical from a lot of our other groups. And then this waste is passed into the surrounding water through thin-walled tissue, through thin-walled tissues of the tube feet and the skin gills. So that's it for our first video about echinoderms. Let me know if you have any questions.